Good afternoon and welcome to the special meeting of the Glendale Water and Power Commission. Today is Monday, October 11, 2010. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Ajemian?
Present.
Commissioner Armenian?
Present.
Commissioner Chan?
Present.
Commissioner Miller?
Present.
President Yao?
Present. And the next item, please.
Item 2A, consideration of recommendation to City Council regarding water ordinance.
There's only one action item for this special meeting, so I'd like to just open up for General Manager Steiger to give a brief overview of the proposed ordinance, and then we'll have the discussion among the commissioners.
Thank you, President Yao. I'm going to ask Pat Hayes of our Water Division to give a very brief overview of the ordinance and what's behind the rate increase.
Thank you, Mr. Steiger. Commissioners, President Yao, I'm Pat Hayes, Principal Civil Engineer in Water. The ordinance, I believe you've been given copies of. I could read that if you'd like that into the record, but I think it's self-evident what the purpose is, and that's to raise the water rates for the various meter sizes. A typical 1-inch or smaller meter, the rate is being raised to $15.6583, and so on and so forth through the rates. The basic drivers for the rate increase are increased in costs versus a number of efforts we've done to do cost containment and cost deferral. In previous presentations to the Commission, including the Joint Commission Council presentation, and in our public outreach, the message has been clearly stated throughout that our revenues don't match our expenses. Our expenses have been reduced through a number of efforts. We've cut back on our maintenance activities. We've reduced the amount of chlorine consumption we have through some better management practices. We've jointly worked with Public Works to try and do our projects in concert with them to avoid additional costs for paving. On the expense side, the field crews are now not able to do as much work as they previously had. Our fleet management is such that we have a longer service life on the vehicles than we previously had done. So the cost containment elements have gone to reduce the cost side. On the capital improvements, we've deferred pretty much all expenses. Our capital improvement program has been deferred. This year we will be doing no main replacement programs, even though we have 9 main replacement programs on our agenda and 2 cleaning and lining projects. None of those are able to be funded under the 10-11 budget. The 10-11 budget that we're proposing only includes some pumping and some regulatory-driven issues. The pumping part would lead to more self-reliance on our part and less purchase from Metropolitan Water District. On the regulatory side, there are things we simply must do to meet Department of Public Health regulations, and those are the capital projects that we're able to do under the 10-11 budget as proposed and approved by the Council. This rate increase would allow us simply to carry out what's in the budget. This budget has already been through those cost controls and the adjustments on the capital. The rate increase in sum total to the average user uses about 1,900 cubic feet, and in layman's terms, that's about 14,200 gallons per month. And if the average user continues at that rate of consumption, their monthly increase in their bill will be $2.33. So that summarizes the comments on what we've done. Internally, we think we've done everything we can to control costs, defer capital improvement, but we absolutely need a rate increase just simply to fund the budget that has been approved, and it's a cut budget. I should make the point that we're seeing a decrease in the level of service in this year. A couple of examples. We have to dose the system with chlorine. That's a coordinated effort between water quality and our operations group, where when they're dosing in certain reservoirs and tanks, the pumps need to be running. We've not been able to coordinate those activities because we have reduced staff time available in the field. That uncoordination has resulted, for example, in the last 2 weeks in Glen Oaks Canyon with a number of high chlorine complaints because we're not able to coordinate the activities like we previously had done. In terms of new meter installations, a fairly radical change in our level of service there. In past years, we've been able to install in about a 3 or 4 week time frame. Now we're looking at 11 weeks to install a new water meter service with the available staff to do that. So again, the point we hope we've made with our presentations to you, the council, and on our outreach to the community is this $2.33 a month average increase is absolutely necessary to fund the utility even with this reduced budget.
Great, thank you. Let's open up for discussions on this issue. Any comments or questions?
One question I'd like to ask. You mentioned a number of reductions that have occurred in your O&M and capital program to reduce expenses. If the rate increase is improved, do you expect to go back to your former method of operations and capital improvement, or would you maintain the capital improvement and operations at the reduced level that you described?
If I understood your question, Commissioner Miller, if we do not get the budget increase, we'll have to make more cuts in our budget.
And if you do get the rate increase, would you maintain those cuts, or would you go back to the mode of operation you had before you implemented the cuts?
With the rate increase, it only funds the reduced budget. It doesn't allow us to add any additional services or capital projects. It maintains the level of service that we're now seeing.
In the handouts, you discussed the cash reserves of the utility and what the council had mandated, and that you've not been able to meet those mandates over the past couple of years, and the reserves are continuing to dwindle. What would be the effect of this rate increase on restoring the cash reserves to the levels stipulated by council?
I don't have the full answer, and I can call Bill Fox up to address some components. We have several components to the reserves, and in general, they will continue to drop even with the rate increase. I think we're required, or the goal for reserves is about $11.2 million. We're currently in the $7 million sort of range, and they're dropping, and they'll continue to drop even with the rate increase.
If you did not have the rate increase, of course, they would drop more quickly, I assume. Do you have a time in which you would be able to indicate when they would hit zero?
I have not done that. Perhaps Bill can respond to that particular question, Commissioner.
We have not had an opportunity to take a look at that analysis at what point it would end up going to zero. Right now, we do have a timing issue that's taking place because we are funding the AMI project, and that does take a utilization of cash. So if in fact you're looking at something between a 12-month period versus a short period of time, we're spending a lot of time at this moment installing the water meters. So in fact that has a demand on our cash. If in fact we don't get the rate increase, we are going to be down probably to around a $6.7 million reserve level at the end of the year. That's what we anticipate. So if we don't get it, we definitely aren't going to be able to meet the cash reserve requirement. Reserve requirements are something that were established by policy, and that's what our goal or target is. But we're not going to be able to meet it even with this rate increase that we have in place. What we are planning on doing as part of the next upcoming budget cycle is to take a look at our reserve requirements. These reserve levels were done several years ago. In fact, each year we take a look at them. We're going to reevaluate whether they're appropriate or maybe they're too low or too high. And in conjunction with our budget analysis that we're doing with the consulting firm that we're going to have, we'll have a better idea of what those requirements should be. So it's all coming together as we go through and do our new rate structuring.
Thank you. I have another question, if I may continue. In previous meetings, Director Steiger mentioned that Council committed to keeping the transfer at a fixed amount. And is that fixed amount a fixed dollar amount or a fixed percentage?
2 years ago, we decided to change the transfer from a percentage of revenue to a fixed dollar amount. And that's both on the water side and on the electric side. That was done for a number of reasons, but primarily it was done to give certainty to the amount of money that would be transferred to the general fund so that the city understood exactly how much money would come into the general fund from the transfer, and at the same time, from GWP's standpoint, it was done to give certainty to GWP so we would know exactly how much to budget each year for the transfer.
So this rate increase then would not result in an increase in transfer to the city?
It would not.
Okay, and that's important to know, I think. I know that we have we're looking at the constitutionality of the rate increase. I think the city attorney's office is looking at that. What's the timeline for that analysis?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Miller, you mean the constitutionality of the transfer?
Pardon me, yes. Sorry.
That's okay.
I stand corrected.
The timeline was approximately 30 to 60 days. That was about a month ago when we were first looking at it. So my estimate would be another 30 days or so, I would think.
Yeah.
And could we contrast that with the timeline for the rate increase? The council is going to vote tomorrow. It goes in, if they were to approve it, it would go into effect in 30 days, I understand?
45 days.
45 days, so it would be in late November. But the customers wouldn't see the increase until?
December.
Until December, okay. If I may continue.
Yeah, we'll just take turns so you can finish up your questions, and we'll go commissioner by commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Would this rate increase affect your public benefit programs at all? Would there be, for example, an increase in the number of people who would be eligible for the programs, or would there be increased value to those who are already eligible?
Public benefits only applies to the electric side of our business.
Okay, right.
The water side receives funding at times from Metropolitan Water District for conservation measures, which we take full advantage of. But that's outside of any funding that we do from our own rates.
All right. We sampled customers in several different ways regarding the proposed rate increase. We went through the mailers from the tax assessor's office. We went through mailers with the GWP database on ratepayers. You also had 3 public meetings that were announced, and you had 2 more meetings, I think, with special groups. You announced it on the website.
We did?
Yeah. Was there, and I understand from the mailers that we received that about 0.05% responses were received from the ratepayers in the form of protests?
That's correct. It's gone up slightly since we had our last meeting. It's still an insignificant number.
Okay.
I don't know what the percentage is, but so it's up a bit.
Was there anyone who wrote or expressed an opinion in favor of the rate increase?
No one expressed that in writing, no.
What kind of input did we get in the protests? Can you characterize maybe, are there certain trends in the protests? Were they related to?
For the most part, the letters of protest have been formulaic. In other words, they've just been protesting on the general basis that there shouldn't be any increase in rates.
Were they form letters, or were they?
No, for the most part, they were not form letters, no.
Okay. I noticed as I understand, there's a reduction in the adjustable rate that's been included in this, and I didn't see it in the ordinance, though. I guess that's just because I had trouble finding it. But there's a reduction in the adjustable rate and then an increase in the commodity charge on the meter rate.
That is correct.
Okay, with a net effect of an increase of 3%, roughly.
The net effect is 3.8%.
I think, in my mind, perhaps the most important question to ask in this process is what is the cost of the rate, of not having the rate increase on the customer? Now, I realize that quantifying that may not be difficult, but maybe a qualitative answer could be provided, or whatever answer you can provide.
The best way to characterize it is the level of service that is expected by our customers, and they've learned to expect from years of operating at a certain level, will deteriorate out of necessity. We will have to stretch out maintenance phases. We will clearly push out capital construction, as we've already done, but it will be pushed out potentially a little bit more than we've done, and there'll be far more prioritization in terms of what's absolutely necessary to provide versus what's not absolutely necessary. So it will have an impact.
Do you believe then that, would it be fair to say that we have reason to believe that there would be more failures if we didn't have the rate increase than if we did over the long haul?
Over the very long haul, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And isn't there a credit rating issue as well?
There is a credit rating issue.
Right.
And
It costs us more money to borrow.
It could very well cost us more money, yes.
That was the point I wanted to make. The Fitch rating indicated without a rate increase, our rating will drop and the cost of borrowing will go up.
Furthermore, your ability to respond to failures will probably be weaker because your O&M program would be weaker. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So it seems fair to say qualitatively that the cost of not enacting the rate increase is greater than the cost of enacting it.
Over time, that we could say that. It's hard to quantify that.
All right.
We try to make that not occur, but it's possible.
All right. I want to thank everyone for letting me ask so many questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. And would like to go next? I'd like to go. Okay, Commissioner.
I have a couple of questions. So right now we're only talking about the 3.8% immediately before us, but could you characterize, any of you from GWP, where we're going to be 1 year from now? Are we going to be having the same discussion, and what's going to be the character of that discussion a year from now?
We have committed to City Council that within the year, in fact, we've already started the process, we will completely revise our rate structure to incent conservation of water, to disincent extreme usage of water, and to price the product in a very different way. I don't know exactly what that means at the moment because we're just getting into the process. So there's no question that within a year from now, we will come back to you and ultimately the City Council with some proposals on how to restructure rates to do the kinds of things I just mentioned and to allow a sustainability of rate making as we move forward so that we're not continually coming back for rate increases on a yearly or periodic basis. So the answer is yes, we will clearly be speaking about rates within the year again, but in a very different way.
And could you also elaborate what you anticipate the impact? I assume by then we'll have many of our smart meters smart water meters. What will be the impact of that on those sorts of discussions?
We expect the data and the customer interaction with our smart meters to greatly impact the amount of water that's used, our ability to price it for various timing, for various volumes, and to communicate with the customer in real time. We expect that to have a fairly large impact on how much the customer actually pays over time. So it should be very, very beneficial. And of course, we're only talking water, but also on the electric side.
And consumers will have a better understanding of their consumption habits at that point, presumably.
Very much so. They can watch it occur, yes.
I did want to comment on, previously it was noted, and I have made this comment at our last commission meeting as well, which is it's stated that we did our public outreach. I beg to differ with that. If you want to look at it in terms of checking the boxes of whether or not we complied with the legalities of what public outreach is, I would say I would agree with that statement that GWP did public outreach. However, when you look at it from the perspective of results, I would argue that public outreach was uninspiring at best. And I don't necessarily say that was the motive of doing it that way, but as I said at the last commission meeting, I think we need to find a new way to do public outreach and engage with the customers. That's the world we're entering as in the utility business, whether it be electricity or water. We need the engagement of the customer to be part of the solution. Otherwise, we're always going to be in this sort of the pickle that we're in. And so I would strongly reinforce what I said last time, which is I think there needs to be a new approach and methodology to public engagement where the utility goes to where the customers are, where there's natural congregations of the customers, different community groups, et cetera. I know you tried that this time with a couple of groups, and that's commendable. I think that's the model that needs to happen more, in addition to whatever legal requirements there may be to call specific public hearing meetings, because part of this is about public education, and we need to engage with customers more. Unfortunately, they don't read all the traditional mediums that we post things in. They don't necessarily watch Glendale 6 as much as we'd like to think they do, and they don't come to meetings. And so, but we need their participation and engagement in this process. So I would like to see us have a more inspired and energetic public outreach process as we get into the rate redesign process, as well as at that time what will coincide as the smart meter engagement. And so that will actually be an opportune time to mix these two things and bring the public awareness up on these issues. On the city transfer issue, this came up in the September meeting. So come November, it will be 60 days. So I'd be interested in seeing a little bit more of a definitive timeline on that and not keep pushing it out, because I think that's often used as a contentious issue on these sorts of discussions, and I think the quicker we clarify that for the public, the better, as well as for the budgeting process. It'll have a tremendous impact on how you approach your future budgeting. So I'm hoping that by November we'll at least have a definitive stake in the ground in terms of when the city attorney's office could come back to the public and report on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? Commissioner Chan?
Yes, I do have a question on the meter installation. Earlier, it was mentioned that before we used to take 2 to 3 weeks to install meter for a new service, I'm assuming, and now it takes 11 weeks. When all of the smart meters are have been deployed, would that help that issue? I mean, quite a bit, even without the rate increase, let's say, because there are still quite a few meter readers out there. And instead of maintaining, the old meters, they'll have more time to probably work on the new services. I mean, how does that work?
Well, the meter readers will ultimately be redeployed in other areas of GWP. Some may end up in the meter service area, which is the area you're referring to. That's very possible. Okay. Not all of them, of course. It may have an impact as we move forward, but to a degree, they're kind of two separate items in that it's a function of what other work we're doing and what we've pushed out or how much we've cut back. So it may. It could very well happen, that we may have some additional resources that could reduce that number, but I can't say for sure.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning of the year, I think that was when the presentation was made where you showed us that we were going to drop the adjustment rate, the water rate. That was the electric rate, actually. Oh, that was the electric?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we dropped that, and we had a net decrease in electric rates of 9%.
Right. And so moving forward, if we find that 3.8% is really more than we need, we could balance that out with future rate actions.
Of course, always, yes.
Right. Okay, that's all I have.
Commissioner Jamian?
This is a general question. I think it's safe to say that the level of service, according to some of the statements made by GWP, has definitely diminished. Can we get a specific line item or understand specifically what will suffer if this rate increase does not go through? I mean, in general, we understand certain things are going to be cut. but I'm sure you've also had some sort of internal discussions of, or at least itemize a list of programs that will suffer due to this. Can we, at least get the top 3, or I'm sure if it's more than 20 items, top 3 or top 5 things that will definitely will suffer because of this increase not going through?
We can do that. I can't do it today, but we can absolutely do that for you.
Okay. So we don't have an idea of what those things will be. I'm sure there's a few things that we can. This may be a question that was not prepared for, but in general, saying that we're going to halt certain programs, or we're going to put certain capital expenditures for the future is great, but what are those things?
The capital expenditures are clearly, and I'm not sure if Bill Fox has them. He may. On our capital program, where we've pushed out and deferred capital expenditures, we don't have that list, or do we have that list with us today? Because that is, yes, that's very, very direct. Yes, we have that.
I'd like to say that right now we've deferred just about all our capital requirements for the water utility other than the AMI project. Everything else has been put on a hold, and we've kind of just moved everything and segued it out. The water group is actually done from a risk analysis standpoint. As in a prior presentation you saw, there was an analysis where they had predicted failure rates, and then they had things that were critical, and then they had different levels of critical, like red, yellow, green, in that. And what they did was to try to identify those most critical ones are the things that we want to continue to have on the drawing boards. Those that are less critical or nice things to do, those are the things that have been deferred outward. But to address you to the specific detail of each item, I'm not proficient in explaining each one of the projects. I do know that I have a list of them that have been put together, and
I can address one in particular.
Okay, and we'll put up a slide for you.
As Bill was saying, this year's capital improvement budget is pretty well decimated from what we normally would be recommending to do. This utility is run very conservatively, and I hope you see that it's a very not only conservative but well-managed utility. We try and assess the risks and maintain a level of service. The capital program, the key components of it are, here's our slide of what's remaining. The Rockhaven well project would, if we do not get the rate increase, that project will be deferred. That project would result in about 700 gallons per minute of flow coming in that we would no longer have to purchase from MWD. In round numbers, about $1 million less money we have to spend buying water on a rental basis and being able to produce locally. That project will simply not be possible. That's the most significant one. Likely the San Luis Rey Tanks one, we might not have a choice there. We have an alternative of either repairing tanks on a very steep slope or coming up with another solution to provide water to that area. If we can't really defer that any longer, or the tanks will be in jeopardy. We need to do something there. These are very high on the criticality list. We're looking at the risk of failure here and the consequence of failure, and that's the product you see up there. When you see anything in the 21 or above level, these are highly critical projects that if they fail, something significant is going to happen, or this already happened. So in concrete terms, the Rockhaven well project will go away.
Also, a follow-up question on the reserves. One of my major things was I want to make sure that for me to run an efficient, or I should say a safe operation, is you want to have your reserves in place. And from what I heard earlier, it looks like even if we approve this, our reserves are not still going to be going up to a level that we would require. And in fact, they may even go down slightly as well. Is that correct as well? So this is not necessarily going to help out the reserves whatsoever. To build, well, it will help not to diminish them further, but it will not increase the reserves?
This will not increase the reserves. You are correct. What we anticipate doing is try to stabilize the operations with the small rate increase that we're asking for. And again, we're looking forward to the new rate redesign to help us to better establish whether our existing reserve levels are appropriate, as well as to take a look at how we best design rates that help induce conservation, and for those that aren't conserving, will then pay a larger portion. So all of that is coming in, as I call a phase 2. Phase 1 is to get us through now until we get our study complete. At that point, we can put a better course of action in place. I view this more like as an interim solution.
Okay. And then one more question. It seems to me there are two issues here. One is a budget issue, and then two is a cash flow issue. One is there was a budget set forth, and in order for the GWP to meet its budgetary needs, it needs to approve this ordinance. Second is a cash flow issue, and looking at some of the slides we saw in our last week's meeting, how is our cash position? Because it looked like the AMI project, for example, has somewhat depleted the cash flow due to us either not getting paid by DOE, or at least those monies not coming in time. How is our cash position?
Well, first off, the DOE grant is for the electric side only. It doesn't have anything to do with the water side. So from the Department of Energy standpoint, we're progressing well with that grant, and that's not an issue. From the water side, when you have to make your capital payments, it can impact the cash position, as you indicate, and we agree that that's a concern. In the event that we have a cash flow position problem, then we will have to take a look at internal measures within the city on how best to address it.
And we're not there yet, right?
We're teetering on the edge. We need your help with this rate increase.
Okay.
Okay, let me go with my questions, and then we'll go back around again. The question I had was about the timing of this rate increase proposal. It seems like we'll probably won't implement into December 1st if City Council does pass this. Is that taken into consideration since this was proposed back in early summer? So if the rate actually gets implemented by December 1st, would this be insufficient to meet your operating needs? Because the 3.8% increase proposed is more for a yearly maintenance, right? So now you only have 7 months. How would that impact your operations?
I would have to say that we've had to adjust internally as a result of the fact that we didn't get this rate increase budgeted at the beginning of the year. Had we been able to get it induced for the full period of time, then we would have been able to take advantage of it for the full 12 months. Likewise, at this point, it's going to be only for a stub period, and so that will require internal adjustments within the GWP Water Group to make sure that they stay on budget.
So it sounds like with the 7-month period to implement the rate increase, it could potentially be worse than what has been presented to us in the last 3 or 4 months. Like all those projects that were critical.
The longer that it takes for everything to get in place and we're able to properly fund the utility, the more impact that we have to adjust internally our operations and maintenance expenses and make priority decisions.
Right. And I just want to echo Mr. Steiger's comment that this is for this year, until July 1st of next year, because hopefully by next year we'll have a separate discussion on rates and how many tiers and how do people conserve and the possibility of a different rate structure in place. So I would like to focus it on this year on how we want to recommend to the City Council on any adjustments that the GWP should make according to the proposal. But I just want to comment on also the transfer, as some of the comments have been targeting the City Attorney's Office on when they're going to make that determination on the constitutionality of the water transfer funds. Even as I recall from Mr. Kavuna's presentation previously, that even with those, even if it's determined that it's unconstitutional to make that transfer, the amount of money that we were looking at will still be used to increase our reserve rather than to use it in a different way, because it's a plus if we actually not consider the issue of the water transfer and just focus on the rate increase, because from that perspective we can just determine that we can't really wait any longer, that we need this rate increase one way or another, independent of what the the city attorney's office would determine next month or even in less than 30 days, hopefully. So that's just one of my comments about water transfer. And the other thing that some people might consider is, what is this rate increase is used for? I know we were saying that it could be used for operations and capital maintenance, but people might think that this could be used for salaries and pensions. Can you comment on that and how we can ensure that this rate increase is for intended purposes and rather not for additional staff salary or pensions?
I'd be happy to. First, we have no intention of making any adjustments in salaries at any level, nor is the city doing that. The city has clearly frozen salaries, and we are part of that freeze. And pensions, actually, in just about every case, employees are now picking up additional funding for pensions on their own. So it's quite the opposite. So yes, this rate increase will not go to fund any additional salary structures or any additional pension payments. It is strictly to fund the operation of the water utility, whatever that means. In other words, operations and maintenance and capital dollars. That's correct.
And my last comment is just like, since the joint session with City Council on this proposed rate increase, for the last 4 months, I've been very impressed with staff on all the presentations, just as the one you just shown, on the critical items that's been deferred and all the maintenance that has been deferred and the level of service that has gone down because of the budget issue. And so I just want to praise staff for all the hard work that you guys have put into this to come to this point where you're presenting to us to make that recommendation to City Council. And I'm just hoping that we make the right one, and just to show all force as the Commission to the City Council what this rate impact really means to the public. Thank you, guys. Anything else?
I just wanted to follow up on some of the earlier questions. You have the chart shown up there, and I noticed that it's color-coded. And I think it would be worth pointing out which projects would be deferred with the rate increase, which without. Can you comment on that, Mr. Hayes?
Yes, this is a criticality chart showing all of our capital projects.
Yes.
That need some attention, and the ranking system is done to help us decide where we should be spending our money. The criticality, as I said, is a product of the probability of failure and the consequence of the failure. For example, all of those main replacement projects are related to issues of adequate flow and pressure, and also as it relates to fire flow.
Yes.
If a project is up there as a main replacement project, it's because, generally speaking, these are pipes that were built in the 1920s that are now about 85 years old. They're heavily tuberculated, which is a kind of a arterial sclerosis of a cast iron pipe, and they do not meet the fire flow requirements. If you were to run hydrants in those areas, they don't produce anywhere near the fire department's requirements.
And if you don't have the rate increase, I take it that the ones that are shown in the red will be deferred, or the ones in the orange, or could you elaborate?
To be clear, these are all of our proposed capital projects.
Yeah.
Virtually none of these are in this year's budget because they've been deferred.
All right.
The Rockhaven project I mentioned isn't on this list because it's one that we decided we were going to do.
So they're all deferred, essentially, except for the ones at the top, which are required by regulation.
Yeah, the only ones being done, to be clear, rehab, replacement, the Dietrich main also involves valves. That's our main reservoir. It accounts for more than a third of our storage. The pipeline that serves that has failed valves, and it leaks, and there's no backup for it. The slope and road repair on San Luis Rey, the tanks there are in a precarious position. And then after that, except for SCADA, which has been an ongoing project, everything else on that list is deferred.
If you do get the rate increase, are any of these projects going to be put back on the schedule that they had originally been slated for?
No.
All right, so they're going to be delayed anyway.
Yeah, as I said before, the rate increase that we anticipated on July 1st is the budget that was approved for this year, July 1 through June 30th. Without the rate increase, we have to defer more projects than what we've already deferred.
Okay, thank you on that. And one other follow-up question on Commissioner Yao's question related to salaries and benefits. I presume that's controlled by memoranda of understandings that you have with the employee unions, and that this rate increase is not tied into any expected changes in that, I take it?
No.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Yao.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Before we move on, I want to echo President Yao's comments. I want to thank you and your staff for answering every single question that we have presented you for the last 4 or 5 months, and I'm impressed, by the responsiveness. And while raising rates a really unpleasant and unpopular concept, but I believe we have looked at as many areas as possible, and all of us have made many suggestions, and I thank you and your staff for accommodating all of us.
Thank you.
Comment, question before I open to the public?
Yeah, one last question, and this is regarding the transfer that happens. What is the date of that transfer generally?
The way the transfer currently works is they take the annual amount and you divide it by 12, and 1/12 is transferred on the city's books each month.
Each month, okay.
Yes.
All right, I didn't know that. Okay, very good. Thank you.
So at this point, I'd like to open the forum to the public for comments before we continue. I'd like to invite Mr. Mike Mulhill to the podium, please. You have 5 minutes.
Name is Mike Mulhill, long-term resident of Glendale, live in Glen Oaks Canyon. I'm concerned what's going on right now today. A lot of things are going on here today. Mr. Steiger says, I feel your pain, people. The city management is not taking a cost of living increase this year. One manager told me they're going to take a 1.5 increase in their pension contribution. Wow. People are leaving Glendale. Headline news. On the way going to my favorite restaurant, Foxy's, this afternoon, I was on the corner of Wilson and Kenwood, and there was a sign that said in bold letters, 2 months free rent. I'll say that one more time. 2 months free rent. What does that tell you? That means that people can't afford to live in Glendale, as we have the highest utility rates in the neighborhood. And are we proud of that? Headline news. People are leaving Glendale. Look at the Unity Festival yesterday. The GNP said it was a success. I was there. It was half empty with people. No one was buying anything but soda pop. Now, I'm going to read to you a letter that I submitted to the Glendale News Press in July of this year, which they chose not to print. And you'll see why they didn't print it after I read it to you. It was titled, GWP, What is Your FICO Score? Every homeowner knows that to get a home loan from the local bank, they have to have a pretty good FICO score. Otherwise, the bank would turn them down. To the banker, the higher one's FICO score, the lower the interest rate to be paid back and the loan approved. To the banker, it's all about taking a risk. At a recent joint meeting between the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Water and Power Commission, a public hearing was convened for the public to hear about another rate increase, 3.8%, because the public did such a great job in water conservation this past year. City water usage dropped 18%, but so did revenues for the utility and taxes that would have to have been collected. The City Council and the GWP Commission acted, surprised. The resident took water conservation seriously, but they would have to pay a stiff penalty of 2.35 cents per month more for being such good Boy Scouts. The meeting that afternoon was all about water conservation, water shortage, and how to pass the increase in water rates to the consumers. GWP never mentioned that they must have smart meters. The City Council bought last year hook, line, and sinker against the wishes of many city activists. Why did we need a state-of-the-art metering system that would measure water, electricity in real time? So big deal. Ask the person who says, I have no rent money. Why commit at least $50 million to the stakeholders during a major recession? What was shuffled under the rug in the afternoon meeting was the FICO score for the GWP. Fitch Bond Rating Company had downgraded the city's water revenue bonds. The rating outlook was being revised to negative from stable. If the city didn't raise the water rates, the bond rating agency might downgrade the city's revenue bonds even further. Would Moody and Standard & Poor's be next in line to do the same thing? Question. GWP's senior management said, this is bare-bone budget. We have deferred maintenance or replacement on 93,000 feet of pipe, motorized valves, and excess roads. What projects and how much money would be needed to fund other needed repairs that the GWP would not tell the public? The list was longer, but the stake of time, the management would not say no more. To an outsider, maybe Glendale Water Management was looking more like our big brother, the city of Glendale, with more broken pipes, sinkholes to follow. Wow. So where did all the money go these past several years? As we have been passing millions of dollars in bonds, we've been paying one of the most highest utility rates in the state. Didn't our elected officials know where the money was going? Didn't our city manager, our general GWP manager? Did anybody know where the money was going? Ask any city activist, and he will tell you where all the money has gone these past 7 years.
Please finish
Unfortunately,
up, Mr. Mohill. Go ahead in another 30 seconds.
Thank you. Just another few seconds. Unfortunately, not for water pipes, valves, access roads, water substation, pothole needed, etc., etc. As Councilman David Weaver would say, I guess a city with over 200,000 residents, only 3 people from the public addressed the council that evening. Therefore, the council, the Water Commission, and the GWP must be doing a great job. GWP, what is your FICO score?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mohill.
Or should one say, what is the FICO score for the City of Glendale management? We all know we can all do better. And I left a copy for everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next up, Mr. Herbert Milano, please. Five minutes.
President Yao, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission, city staff, my name is Herbert Milano. The justification for the rate increase is presented in these documents and the documents to the City Council primarily on the fact that the Metropolitan Water District has increased our rates this year by 20%. That is the main message. We need to increase the rates because the Metropolitan Water District increased the rates by 20%. Now, this seems logical, except that there's something significantly left out of this report that was presented at the Homeowners Coordinating Council, and that is that the portion of the water usage for Glendale Water and Power is, from the usage that comes from the Metropolitan Water District, is only 60% or less. So if there is an increase of 20%, it will be 20% of the 60%. So the accurate way of representing it is up to a 12% overall increase on the cost of the water. That makes sense to me. Makes sense to basic math. If the rate is a little bit less, in other words, it's 20% of the 60%. That's what it really means, of the overall usage. So therefore, the the amount is overstated the way it is presented here. The image that it gives is that we really had a 20% increase in the cost of water, which is not accurate. It needs a more accurate and reflective way of representing that information. The other problem that we have is that the cost and the way we are charged for water is there is a fixed cost and a usage cost. The fixed cost is for the labor and maintenance and capital improvements, and the usage cost for the amount of the water that is used. So if the rates are going to be transferred to the public, the rate increases, it should be transferred on that portion, on the variable cost, on the usage cost. But that's not the way the Glendale Water and Power is doing it. They're taking the water usage additional cost and putting it into the fixed cost. That doesn't make sense. In any way, the way you want to turn it, it doesn't make sense. If that money is going to be applied, it has to be applied to the usage. Because after all, that is the one way that it can align with the objectives of this utility with regard to conservation. Conservation is the driving force of all of the issues that we have. Conservation is the crisis that was declared 3 years ago. Therefore, if a rate increase is going to be applied, all of it, all that increase has to be applied to the variable section of it, not to the fixed rate. It is unfair, and it is unfair to apartment owners who don't get a break. After all, the way the structure is, there is a break on the lower cost on the first 100 on the HCM. And if you have an apartment building, it only applies to, like, say, to one unit. The other units, even though everybody might conserve, we wind up paying the higher rate. Well, I think it's $1.83 per HCM. Now, there's another problem. And the other problem has to do with the infrastructure. In 2007, the Glendale Water and Power commissioned a study, and in this study it said the following, that the infrastructure needs for the water utility requires that the city spend $222 million in the next 20 years. That's the nature of that report. So how is it possible then for the city to have justified transfers of $4 million a year out of the utility when there was this significant and drastic need for $222 million of infrastructure repair, some of which was listed in the reports presented at this commission last month, others that were presented at the Glendale Homeowners Coordinating Council. How can we justify those transfers when we had such a significant and dire infrastructure need? And I think that's what we must address. If you just divide it by 10, should we say divided by the 20 years, we wind up with about $10 million a year of absolutely dire infrastructure needs that the water utility needs. How can then you justify taking money from the utility to the general fund under those circumstances? The way that the financials are presented, the summary for the utility, is that the transfer is considered an operational expense. It is not. The transfer comes at the end of the process. So you first calculate what your net is, and then the transfer becomes external to it. And it is external to it in light of what has happened in other cities and the challenges that other cities have made with regard to Proposition 218. So there are several problems with regard to the way this information is being presented and the way that we as customers are going to be charged for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Harry Zavos, please.
My name's Harry Zavos. I'm a citizen of Glendale, and I would just like to get some information so I'm better informed. I get the impression from things that have been said before this body, before the council, in written documents, and just in conversation, that a rate increase would be necessary even without the transfer to the general fund. And clearly, the presentation that was made about a month and a half ago, where I was present, indicated that, because in that presentation, operating costs, in order to get the budget in the black, were going to have to be slashed dramatically. I think it was, the word was to the bone. The average amount was around 45%, And I think when Mr. Kavunas was asked by the chairman whether or not with a rate increase the utility would be in good shape, he indicated he wasn't very sanguine about that. And when asked how much the slashes in operating costs represented, he said $2 million. That's a lot of money. In addition to that, in that presentation, there was an indication that there had been actual failures in various systems, and those had been slated for capital improvements. There was some 20 of them, and under the current budget, 11 of them would have to be deferred. That doesn't mean we're going to save any money. In fact, the statement was made when you defer it, you're still going to have to do it, but it's going to cost even more because you've deferred it. There were 6 capital improvement projects scheduled to be done for predicted failures, and 5 of those had to be deferred because there wasn't sufficient money under that budget. Now, I can't believe that kind of straitjacket occurred just in 1 year. So I have several questions I would appreciate finding out. One, how many dollars do those 11 deferred capital improvement projects for systems that have already failed, how many dollars does that represent? And how many dollars do the 5 out of 6 deferred capital improvement projects for predicted failures, how many dollars does that represent? And the question also is, did that shortage in money, that straitjacket that the water budget is in right now, not being able to do capital improvement projects for systems that already failed, did that happen overnight, or has that been accumulating over several years, and over how many years has it been accumulating? Now, that's important to me because laying aside what I've talked about in terms of transfers of water fees to the general fund in violation of Proposition 218, let's set that aside, but that's not a mean figure. Over the last 3 years, that would represent $12 million, and it may be that the capital improvements projects could have been funded out of that, and we wouldn't have to drastically slash our operating budget. But it also has relevance in terms of the charter. Section 22, or the provision that provides for transfers, indicates that the council can waive those transfers if, in fact, in its judgment, it's necessary for the, I can't remember the magic words, I'm sure council here can, for the financial viability of the utility. So even if there was no transfer problem in terms of its constitutionality, the question is, why is the council siphoning off $4 million of ratepayers' funds to the general fund, and in the process leaving the water ratepayers with a system where there are failed systems, and we're having to defer the repair of them because that money isn't available, it's gone elsewhere? That's a significant question. I think the ratepayers have every right to know the dollar figures represented by those projects which are being deferred on systems that have already failed, the amount of dollars for those 5 systems in terms out of the 6 that are predicted to fail, how many dollars that deferment represents, and if in fact the $2 million that was off the top of the head of Mr. Kavunas with respect to operating costs is an accurate figure, and I would appreciate if you can give me that information, if there's somebody from staff that can.
Thank you, Mr. Zalbos. Any comments or questions for the public speakers? No? So, Mr. Miller?
Yes, I take it, I believe one of the commissioners asked earlier regarding how many dollars would be saved by the deferred capital projects, and I believe Mr. Fox stated that that number wasn't available. Is that correct? All right. Okay. And then in connection with the statement that the MWD rates went up, the MWD rates affect only the adjustable. Is that correct?
Correct.
And there's no increase on that, right? The increase is actually being warranted by the cost of operating the system?
Primarily. There is a 7.5% net increase this year and a 7.5% net increase next year.
Okay.
But you are correct. The increase is being driven primarily by the operations and maintenance and capital costs.
Okay. If it had been motivated solely, or let's say principally, by the MWD rate increase, and if it was 20% of 60%, we'd be looking at a 12% increase, but we're only looking at 3.8%.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. There was a comment about a pension increase, but that's, I take it that's at City Hall. Or is there one? I don't know about that.
There's no increase in pension. There's been an increase in contribution from employees to the pension fund. That's correct. So, but that's from the employees.
Right. The utility rate in the area, there was an allegation of it being the water being the highest in the area, but that is not correct, I understand. Could you comment, Director?
That is nowhere nearly correct. In fact, we are below average for our area. We are pretty much dead center in the middle of our of the 5 surrounding water utilities, but we are overall, even with the rate increase, still below the average.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Yeah, no, we're rehashing a lot of the issues from previous meetings, so I don't mind doing that. It's just that we're a little short on time, so if you can make some comments or provide additional input, then that'll be great. Any additional comments?
What is our time frame? What is
We need to be out here in 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Wow.
So go ahead and questions.
In light of that, I mean, it's very. If we're going to make some sort of a suggestion here, I don't think the kind of questions that are going to be asked are not going to do it in 10 minutes. I was just going to ask if we could address some of the questions that were asked by our last speaker. But from what I heard from Fox is we don't have any numbers today, or.
Go ahead.
I just want to make a comment. I'm very unhappy about a rate increase, but from what I've heard today is it's a Band-Aid at best and a very small Band-Aid, which is not going to solve any of the issues really that need to be solved from a longer-term perspective. And as much as I would like to oppose this sort of rate increase, I don't think this is the hill to die on. The real issue is going to come up later when we do rate redesign. And I think that's where we need to focus the attention of this commission. That's where I would encourage the public to focus its attention, because that's where the real rubber is going to meet the road in terms of setting this situation straight. Hopefully by that time we'll also have a sense of where the city transfer issue is going to go. But I also wanted to comment on that. Even if the city transfer determination is such that the city transfer does not have to happen anymore, it just shifts the issue somewhere else in the city. While it may not be a GWP issue, city residents will have to still deal with the budgetary implications of that in other parts of the city. So that is not the silver bullet here either on this sort of situation, although it could certainly help from the perspective of the water budget specifically. I really encourage us to look at the longer term picture here, encourage the public to get more active and participate in what will be a public process on the rate redesign, so that they can also comment on those things when we get to the point of proposing what that's going to look like, and start educating the public. And hopefully the GWP can enhance its efforts to engage the public even further, and that way we come to a better solution for the long term. Thank you.
So with that, is there a motion to recommend to the City Council on this water rate ordinance, one way or another?
I would like to so move that the Glendale Water and Power Commission recommend to the Glendale City Council to adopt the ordinance amending Glendale Municipal Code Chapter 13.08 relating to water rates as presented to the GWP Commission during this session.
So, is there a second? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
By Commissioner Chan. Can Council reread the motion as moved by Commissioner Miller?
Certainly. Moved by Commissioner Miller, seconded by Commissioner Chen, that Glendale Water and Power Commission recommends that the Glendale City Council adopt the ordinance amending Glendale Municipal Code, Chapter 13.08, relating to water rates, as presented to the GWP Commission during the October 11, 2010 GWP Commission special meeting.
That's what you have moved, right, Commissioner?
Yes, that is what I moved. Thank you,
Okay.
Council.
So at this point, I'd like to have a voice vote for the motion that was moved by Commissioner Miller. Can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Ajemian?
Just two small comments before. I wanted to reiterate Commissioner Arminian's comments. Very unhappy about this budget increase. I just think operating any business on a very slim cash flow situation is not smart. Whether I understand the public's interest, and it is also our interest to make sure the public is served properly. However, it is also in the public's interest to make sure the operations of the business are served properly and it meets its general daily operations, and we don't introduce any risks that do not need to be introduced to the public. With that being said, aye.
Commissioner Arminian?
Aye.
Commissioner Chen?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
President Yao?
Aye. So the motion passed. Is the next item, please?
The adjournment?
Is there the motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that the commission adjourn the meeting.
Anyone second?
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.